Ladies and gentlemen, the next presentation is also they are stepping into another interesting area, that's power sharing, economic development and national security, Sri Lanka's crisis of responsible government. And the presenter is Ms. Samindika Elkaduwe from the ABU.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Since we are running a little late, I'll try to sum up my arguments in the paper. So I'll straight away move on to the research or the focus of the study. Now, in transitional societies like Sri Lanka, in countries like us in which we always try to move towards reconciliation, power sharing agreements, and then what happens if we cannot reach stability, this essential question of what amounts to stability comes up. And then in what ways we can achieve stability comes up. In that question, there are two essential models of governance in the world which we can look into. Firstly, there is this model, and I hope that all of you are very familiar with this argument, that you can only achieve stability through economic development and ensuring national security. While making that argument, a lot of people forget the fact that power sharing arrangements, political accommodation, claims of self-determination, accommodating claims of self-determination, they should be overlooked, because when you are in a race towards economic development in a secure environment, ideas such as power sharing, political accommodation distracts the course of the government. So to be focused, to stay focused, you should focus only on economic development, which will definitely bring you stability. That is the sort of argument which we listen to always. So, having listened to that, what I hope to do was to find out the key arguments made by these people who promote this model of governance, in support of this model of governance, against power sharing arrangements and attempted political accommodation, to find out to what extent I can counter those arguments. So in my research, I looked at the objectives of economic development and ensuring national security, and found that the basic objective of economic development, national security, is to make sure that people live in a stable environment in which there are no conflicts, where welfare is established, and so on. So if you look at the objectives of power sharing, you may find similar objectives. So those who argue that stability should not be destroyed or disturbed by claims of political accommodation and self-determination, they necessarily point the fact that if you do this, if you go for that, the objectives of economic development and national security will not be, established or achieved. So my point is, if you look at the objectives of power sharing and compare them with the objectives of economic development and national security, they are not necessarily at variance. Those who promote the ideals of stability through economic development and national security, they only look at the question of stability in a very narrow viewpoint. They forget the fact that now they actually focus only on socio-economic development and necessarily overlook the fact that stability, in whatever form, has to be a long-term one. And if you focus only on the socio-economic, or what we in Sri Lanka will commonly refer to as President Jayawardena model of development, I mean no content, but that is a commonly used term in Sri Lanka. If you focus on that, what you will get is a stability which is short-lived, but nothing which is in the long run. So these are the main objectives which are made by people who object power sharing arrangements or attempted political accommodation in transitional society. Firstly, that attempted political accommodation at this phase distracts the course of the government and in turn the focus of the people. Now this fact that it distracts the focus of the people is stressed in Sri Lanka a lot. This essentially relates to the priorities of the exercise of governmental power. Secondly, cost of political accommodation cannot be borne at this important hour of development. Thirdly, central government in development, then again credit to President Jayawardena and the Singapore model, fear of secession and concerns of national security. Now, what I attempted to do in my research is try and counter this main argument to show that you can have it all. That is, you can politically accommodate claims to self-determination, go for development and to national security as well. So how did I try to counter it? Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very broad area. What I tried to touch is a very little portion of that. I just tried to counter the main argument. So I might not be touching upon this positive issues that one might think of when you think of this broad area. Now, firstly, that the fact that distract the cause of government, ladies and gentlemen, those who make this argument necessarily overlook the very important point, that is how crucial timing is for a political accommodation or a power sharing arrangement. Ladies and gentlemen, when I read literature on the point, all the authors, distinguished scholars who have written about federalism or any form of power sharing arrangement or conflict resolution, they also point that whenever, if you want to attempt a political accommodation, if you want to go for a scheme, do it early. Or at the outbreak of the conflict, or if you see any sort of political isolation in a group, in the community, attempt it at that stage. If you fail, and then if the conflict erupts and then it continues, then when the conflict ends, at the first possible opportunity for reconciliation, attempt it. What happens if you don't do that is, according to these writers who point out Malaysia, who point out Nigeria as examples, and also Sri Lanka is the fact that if you wait till the conflict intensifies, then you're left with no choice. That's what happened to us in 1987 when we agreed to India to come up with the 13th Amendment. So because then the separatists take the upper hand, and whatever they want to happen, will happen automatically. So if you want a compromise, if you want your wish also to be implemented, then try it at a very early stage. So if you wait till this happens, or if you wait till stability happens to economic development and national security, what will happen at the end is, you will have growth which will go away once another insurgency arises. So the next argument, cost of political accommodation cannot be borne at this important hour of development. Yes, political accommodation is costly, we all know that. But then again, it is not as costly as what happens if you do not accommodate the claims of the minority group. So we have seen what happened to Sri Lanka. Now, the point is, this cost factor can effectively be addressed in the power sharing arrangement itself. For example, now most of the time we refer to the 13th Amendment in Singha as a Suduari or a white elephant. Why? They cannot be maintained. The provincial councils basically. Why? Because they do not have, they have very limited ways to earn their own income. So, if you focus on self-reliance and if you have models of self-reliance or devolved units, this can be very successfully addressed. Then the third argument, the significant role of the central government in development. Ladies and gentlemen, this may have hold good for Singapore and Malaysia, the Southeast Asian model, until the point that we realize that it doesn't work for us. This significant role of the central government argument was brought in when the executive presidential model was introduced as a second amendment to the 1972 Constitution. But then also they argued that this has to happen. But then again, if you set out the role of the central government right in the arrangement, this can also be, avoided. Since the time is running out, I'll quickly counter the last argument. Fear of secession and concerns of national security. Ladies and gentlemen, that happens when you do not attempt it. Now, if you look at Switzerland, the canton system, you will see that they have been running for a very long time without any problem. But actually, the problem is if you lack political willingness, a genuine political willingness to implement whatever the arrangement you have come up with, then even the most idealistic system would fail. So that we have to keep in mind. So, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, this is Just a picture, sir, I'll take 1 minute. This is actually a picture of Alexander. This is Alexander the Great unbinding the Gordian knot. If you all have heard about the Gordian knot story, you would know that when Alexander the Great was in his quest, invasion quest, his prophet told him that if you want to become the king of Asia, you have to cut the Gordian knot. So when you cut the Gordian knot, he had to think about he had to think outside the box. He had to think about it in a different way. So ladies and gentlemen, country like Sri Lanka, we need to think of this, and we need to go for the Alexandrian solution. Thank you very much.